Ready? You ready?
We're ready.
All right. Well, here we come. Here we come. Hello, everyone. We're waiting for us to populate here. Welcome, whiskey lovers. The wine people always show their faces, but whiskey lovers like to
Whiskey
remain
lovers
anonymous
hide.
sometimes. Yeah,
Whiskey lovers hide.
plausible deniability. So welcome everybody to the Zoom chat. We're gonna start a little bit slowly. Oh, let me get this recording here. This is good. So hold on a second. I'll stop. We'll just keep it going. We'll start from here. So, hi everybody. Oh, there we are. Hi, Bill. Welcome to the first time we're doing this. We've done a bunch of these wine dinners, about which we've got a lot of press, and some of you have joined us for, and we thank you very much. This is the first spirits tasting we're going to be doing, and the genesis of this tasting is Mark and I both we both participate in the Ultimate Spirits Challenge, which is run by Paul Pacult, and here's how we participate. Mark works all my shifts so that when Paul invites me to go do the Ultimate Spirits Challenge, I am able. The Ultimate Spirits Challenge is it's the most respected American spirits competition, and the way that works is spirits brands send in their whiskeys or vodkas or whatever spirits they are, and then at the Ultimate Spirits Challenge, Paul Pacult, who's our guest and our host this evening, has them blinded, and it's an amazing operation with thousands of spirits and dozens of judges, all blinded, all done in an absolutely professional environment, and the judges are some of the best in the
judging panel is a who's who of the spirit world.
And I don't know how I got on it, but thanks, Paul.
And Francis.
Right, exactly. So what these whiskeys are is the top whiskey the top spirit in every category gets the chairman's trophy. So these all are 97, 98, 99 points. And that's an average of, most of these spirits have been tasted by at least 4 judges, if not more. And it's an average of all of the judges' scores. So to come out with 97 points after going through 4 different judges and have that be the average is amazing. This year, I think, was the best year I've judged many years on the panel. And I think these whiskeys are great. So before I introduce Paul, I just want to point out that we have Dale DeGroff, who's joined us this evening as well. So Dale is often a judge on the panel, and we have to restrain him from mixing everything with lemon juice and a shaker, but because he's a cocktail expert. And there we have it. So let me just tell you about Paul Pacult. Met Paul Pacult 27 years ago when he was hosting a radio show on spirits that we listened to, and so we'd see him at various spirits tastings, and he has become, and this isn't me saying this, he's a preeminent spirits expert in the United States. He has several publications. He runs the Ultimate Spirits Challenge and the Ultimate Wine Challenge. They do Dale and Paul have a Bar 5 Day, which is the #1 certification for bartenders, not sommeliers, across America. And it's just top-notch stuff. And I thought it would be great to have Paul come and join us today to talk us through these top of category whiskeys of 6 different kinds of scotches. And with that, I present you Mr. Paul Pacult.
Hello, everyone. Mark, Francis, thank you for having me. I love being had. To get to Chairman's Trophy and these 6 Scotch whiskeys, to get to this point, as Francis was saying, is extremely rigorous. A little bit of my background is I've been reviewing spirits professionally now since 1989. And I think the total is about 32,000 or 33,000 spirits over that time. And I'm still getting to like it. But the point of Ultimate Spirits Challenge is to glean out the best of the best. As Francis mentioned, Ultimate Spirits Challenge is in the fortunate position of being highly thought of around the world. So the spirits companies tend to send us their best of the best spirits. And so the judges, of course, have a great time. We judge in a way that is extremely rigorous. I'm a very tough critic, and usually my way of judging, at least in my writing, is from 1 to 5 stars. And I give very, very few 5 stars. And I feel the same about competitions, that if you're going to get the top trophy in your category, which in this case, as Francis said, is the chairman's trophy, I want those products to go through as many of the judging panels as we can. And this year, because of the safety and health precautions that we had to, of course, establish at our building during May and June, we were able to go through the process in a very laborious way. And Francis, excuse me, Francis came in at the tail end to judge the finals, all the award round, basically. I'm still waiting for your check, Francis, by the way. But it's an extremely tough competition. And I often will tell spirits producers, if you don't believe in your product, if you don't think that your product can win a trophy, I don't want it in the competition, because you are going to be so disappointed. So send us the best that you have, because the judging panels are tough. And that's how I like them to be. The methodology is very tricky, it's actually double blind. And by double blind, I mean, not only do the judges not know what they're tasting, I mean, they know the general category, but even the people who are bringing in the flights to the judges, they don't know what those particular products are. And I do that. I know it sounds extremely anal, but I do this just as an extra safeguard that the judges will never know what they're tasting. Price is not an issue. It all comes down to one thing. How good is the product that's right in front of them in that glass? And in this case, with these particular 6 scotches, they each went through, beg your pardon, they each went through 4 different panels.
4 panels of 2 judges each.
4 panels of 2 judges, so basically 8 judges. And as Francis said earlier, the fact that they all got such enormously high scores is a real testament to their quality. So that's pretty much how we do it. We take 2 months basically to do Ultimate Spirits Challenge. Fortunately, we own our own building and we've built our own facility so that we can take that amount of time. And my feeling has always been, my place as a critic is, one, to be honest, to be candid, but also to respect the community of distillers around the world. I mean, I know most of these people. I've visited most distilleries over the last 30 years, and my respect for them is just enormous. The amount of, first of all, the amount of investment that is involved, the investment of time, the investment of expertise, the expense of getting products to the marketplace. It's a very costly business. And so my role as judging director of Ultimate Spirits Challenge is to assure that those people are all treated with the utmost respect. And if their product is $4.99, that product is given as much respect as a product that's $4,000 a bottle. So the fact that we've come around to these 6 that we're talking about tonight, it's no small accomplishment. These products have really earned their spot.
Well, before we get to the actual tasting, can you just give us an idea of how many Scotch whiskies were submitted where these 6 came on top?
Off the top of my head, Francis, I would say probably 500 to 600. There's a lot.
Right. And remember, Paul's already told people, if it's not something that's your best of your best, don't send it.
That's a
yeah. And you know, some people think it's just kind of a tagline or an enticement, but I really mean it. If you don't believe 100% in that product, don't send it to us.
Right.
We want to be looking at the hallmark, the landmark products of our moment in history. And these 6 from 2020 really do they check off all the boxes on great spirits.
Well, and I'd like to start to go through the whiskeys because I just can't sit. I'm like that kid who
Yeah, this is,
the kid with the cookie.
they've been sitting in front of me too long.
Give it the cookie. Just the one thing about the Ultimate Spirit Challenge, if you're out shopping and you see a shelf talk or you see a publication and next to a spirit, it says USC 95, that means it's US Ultimate Spirits Challenge 95. It means that people are listing the scores in this competition on their spirits, as a matter of course. It's pretty amazing. So, Paul, why don't we go through these whiskeys?
Well, first one is a blended Scotch, and it's Dewar's Double 27-year-old. So, does everybody have it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, why don't we taste it? See what we've got. Whoa. Now, over the years that I've been writing about whiskey, actually, the New York Times asked me to write about Scotch whiskey in 1989 for the Sunday magazine. And I have to say, at the time, my prejudice about blended Scotch was quite alarming. I never thought blended Scotch could ever rank properly or justifiably with single malt Scotch. Well, I was wrong. And I learned over the years, sitting in on many blending sessions, that making a blend is much, much harder than making a single malt. Single malt is just easy in that it's 100% barley malt, done in a pot still, usually distilled twice, aged for at least 3 years, though much, much longer typically. And you let it go when you think the time is right. It's actually not that difficult. The difficult part with single malt is finding that sweet spot for when it should be taken out of the barrel and released. A blended Scotch is much, much more difficult to make because you're dealing with so many moving parts on this. You're dealing with grain whiskeys that are made in the big factory-like distilleries, mostly in the lowlands of Scotland, that make high proof whiskey out of corn and wheat. And you're also dealing with the single malt distillers. So it's that combination of the two. And the heart and soul of most Dewar's it come from the malt distillery that they own of Aberfeldy in the Central Highlands. Lovely, lovely area. The reason that they call this double, first of all, 27 years for a blended Scotch is really old. Most blended Scotches usually come in at 6 to 8 years old. Occasionally you'll see a 10, occasionally you'll see a 15. To see one of 27 years is extraordinary. Why do they call this double? They call it that because of the process that it goes through. First, the malt whiskeys are distilled and they are aged separately. Then the grain whiskeys are distilled and they are aged separately. Along the line, when the master distiller and master blender feel that the time is right, for this particular whiskey, the malts are then blended together, but they are aged separately. The grain whiskeys are then aged together, but they are still aged separately. They don't come together as grain and malt whiskeys until later on, after they've each had some time in barrel. Then they are brought together, but then they're put away in barrels for another extended period, 10, 12 years in this case. The final step, the fourth step of the double process, is how the whiskey is finished. And in this case, this particular whiskey was finished in sherry butts that aged Pelo Cortado sherry from Andalusia, Spain. So it goes through this 4-step process, and that's why they call it double. What do you think of it?
Yeah, if anybody can feel free to unmic and make a comment. We're a small group, so we just won't talk over each other.
Paul, can I ask you a question? Have you seen Dewar's, their blend? You and I being the oldest members of the group here, I started drinking this in the 70s, and their blend, in my opinion, has remarkably changed in those 40 years. What do you think?
Great question, Dale. And the answer is yes. The answer is yes across the board, basically for all blended scotches. And the reason that they've changed is because in the 70s and 80s, most of the blend ratios were 70% grain whiskey and 30% single malt whiskey. But as single malts picked up speed in terms of public popularity, particularly Glenfiddich and the Glenlivet, certainly in the United States, they were really popular and picking up a lot of traction in the 80s. By the 90s, they were very, very popular. So the Scotch companies said, well, if we're going to make and keep up with the trends with our blends, we better up the ratio of the malts in that blend. So now many blended scotches are actually like 35% malts and 65% grain whiskeys. Some are actually 40% malt, 60% grain whiskey. So that's the big difference. Blends have gotten better. They've gotten a little bit heavier because of the increase of malt whiskey. But that's a great question, great observation, because I agree with you.
I would say that when we started bartending at the Frog and the Peach, or I started bartending at Frog and the Peach in 1986, their well whiskey was Dewar's White Label, and every uppy ordered a white label. They just say, I'll have a white label. And I used to think, well, that is insipid nothing. And I don't know, maybe about 10 years ago, I got to just drink a sip of Dewar's White Label. It's very drinkable. It's, even the basic white label Dewar's now is quite a drinkable whiskey. But what do you get in this 27-year? I think it's amazing. I think this whiskey is beautiful and elegant, and marzipan and almond cookie and just but the kind of the breath and the heat is just perfect on the palate as well. I think it's super well integrated. That's what I love about it. When you taste it, Paul, what do you taste?
I think we should have started you with something shitty so you would see how good this is.
or a white label. Or we should start you with a white label. We should have done.
No, this to me.
I have a bottle of wild turkey. I'll send you guys a sample.
No, what I pick up is that nice end note of the Palo Cortado. Mm-hmm. And I get a really nice orchard fruit, grapey, almost prune-like quality to it that is just such a nice ending to it. And that kind of comes along to me in the finish. At the beginning, to me, this is very grainy, very cereal-like, and then it just softens up on the palate and goes fruity. And that's the beauty of the finishing in the Palo Cortado.
You really feel that it was aged in those sherry casks.
Yeah.
I got one question on how we drink it. I tried the first one as is, and the second time I sipped it, I put in half a drop of water, and it opened up the flavor. Am I butchering the profession here, or is that what professionals do?
Not a bit, and thank you so much for saying that, because a whiskey of this age and a whiskey of this complexity, most master blenders in Scotland have told me right from the get-go, right from 1989, do not be afraid in America, to put it in an ice cube or to add usually a 3-to-1 ratio of mineral water just to open up. And what happens is it's actually a biochemical reaction is what it is. When you add water to a complex whiskey like this, the water separates molecules, and when molecules separate, that releases aroma in particular. So all of a sudden, if I know when I've become a master blender now for a brand of American whiskey called Jacob's Pardon, and when I'm going through barrels, trying to pick barrels for the next expression of Jacob's Pardon, I always add a little water after tasting it neat. And that just really opens the whole expression up, but mostly the aroma, which to me is the most important part of the whole exercise. Yes, great idea on adding water. You could do that with all of these, actually.
Thank you.
When I taste both professionally and when I'm for my own enjoyment, I often drink without adding some water, but what I always go and I nose everything first, and I have a little taste of everything first, and then I put just a drop or two of water in, because what you're looking for is that catalytic reaction. You're not trying to dilute it down. And then I put a drop or two of water in it, and I see if that improves it for me or not. And sometimes I like the result, and sometimes I think, no, I'm going to drink this straight. And I'll tell you, my first vacation that I took after we started was in 1995. I think I got on my motorcycle and I went down to Kentucky, and I got to meet Colonel Elmer T. Lee. And I learned more about bourbon from that man's kitchen table than I learned from any book I ever read. But he was the master distiller at Ancient Age Distillery from basically the end of World War II until he retired, and then he passed away only a couple of years back. When he tastes whiskey professionally, he's tasting through the rick house every day. He brings everything down to about 20% alcohol and then tastes and spits. But he's like, no, when I'm making a professional, I don't do that. I don't enjoy whiskey brought down that low. But one, there's no right way to do it. As long as you pay the bill, it's your whiskey. You can do what you like. Number two, you can mess around with what works for you, and don't be afraid to do what works for you. I guess. Would you endorse that, Paul?
Yeah.
Well,
It works really well with a Rob Roy too.
Oh yeah, brilliant. It would be brilliant with a Rob Roy.
You know, Paul.
What happens when they make me stay in the shop? I'm making them into Rob Roy's.
That's lovely. You know, the age, Paul, from the first aromas I got out of this glass of chocolate and leather and smoke, you know, I thought, man, this has got some age on it. And it's richness, you know, that you don't expect from a blend. You know, it's really,
It's luscious. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
You know, the Scotch is luscious.
And
I,
that's
what is this 40%? It's a little higher, isn't it?
46.
I think it's
Yeah.
46.
Yeah, 46.
That's another
Maybe.
part of the richness that I'm getting. You feel that little bit of extra proof really brings a lot of flavor to the game.
Yeah.
And just so you know, we always have droppers behind the bar with water in them, so you can put one drop in, you can put 10 drops in, you can put a lot of water in. We always keep droppers behind the bar, so that's something you can.
I testify to that because every time I sit down, as soon as I ask for something, I don't even have to ask for it. Chris shows up with your medical little brown bottle dropper, and I use it, and people are looking at it like, wait a minute, Norm from Cheers. Why did you do it so well?
Well, we want everyone to feel like Norm from Cheers when they come into our bar. So
Francis,
Yeah.
I want to,
Please.
both you and Mark, I do whatever you tell me. I'm very open to suggestions. So while you were saying, I think that Mark used the S word, but I can't remember. And Johnny Walker Black is not as I remember my father's Dewar's when I was 13. Did I just admit that? But the two B's on that, I just compared, it was body and burn. And the Dewar's was much fuller on the palate, and the burn was hardly there. And not that black is bad, but it was for an aficionado, not even aficionado, a person new to this like me. It was right there. It was right there.
Oh,
That's
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Francis.
Dennis, that's the effect of all the barrel aging. You know, for over 27 years. And again, because this has an age statement, the age statement means that the youngest whiskey in this Dewar's double is 27 years old. So there are likely some 30-year-old whiskeys here. So this is a senior citizen in terms of Scotch whiskey, and it shows that mellowness. And I think that's all the impact of the wood.
And before we move on to the next whiskey, because this I think is the oldest whiskey we're going to try today. Something that to watch out for when buying whiskeys in other bars is, you know, just because it's older doesn't mean it's better. And very often you're like, you know, oh, I had a 25-year-old whiskey. I'm like, oh, it's a shame they didn't take that out of the barrel 10 years before they did. You know. So talk to us. A whiskey can be too old, right, Paul?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of very, very old whiskeys. And again, I think it's a misconception that just because something is older, it's better, or if something is more expensive and older, it's really better. The book that Sue and I have coming out next May has 2,400 some reviews of all categories of whiskeys. And at the beginning of the Scotch section, I do say older is not necessarily better. And I mean, my sweet spot for Scotch whiskey actually is 12 years old to 20 years old. I like when there's a little bit of youthfulness, a little bit of immaturity there, which usually comes out in terms of cereal grain or breakfast cereal notes, but a little bit of age so that the wood can kind of round off some of that edge of the raw spirit. And so I like that combination of some youthful impact, but also the mellowing aspect of wood aging. And so for me, 12 to 20 years is really a sweet spot for Scotch.
For those of you who, I mean, who've been coming into our bar for 25 years, I mean, in the early days of Scotch, there weren't a lot of choices, Francis and I would almost always, I don't want to say talk people out of Macallan 25 because it's a great Scotch, but I don't know that the 18 was a little rougher around the edges in
those days,
and
it was,
you know, had some real interesting stuff going on. And so we would often downsell people who were going to get the 25 into the 18 if they, you know, and that's in the ages when people hadn't tried a lot of Scotches, because it was such an interesting spirit at 18 years old, and it was mellow and delicious and fantastic at 25, but there was some cool stuff going on at 18 that wasn't still there at 25.
And you will notice that when you see older whiskeys on our list, we don't buy it just because it's old. I mean, there are whiskeys that we don't buy their oldest expressions, not because they're more expensive and because they're not as good. So when you see the Lady Burn 41-year-old behind our bar,
one of the great Scotches of my life.
That was pretty good.
It was, you know, it was the.
What is it called?
Lady Burn.
Lady Burn 41-year-old.
Yeah, it's a ghost whiskey, right? And Lady Burn's gone, isn't it, Paul?
It's gone,
Gone,
unfortunately, yeah.
That's ghost whiskey. But what I'm saying is, if you see an old whiskey on our list, it's because we think it's worth it. But let's move on to the next whiskey, because we'll be here all night if we don't otherwise. I'm like the kid with the cookie.
We might be here all night. Beware.
Gee, what a shame.
I got plenty.
Our bottles still have a little whiskey in them.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know this now. So next whiskey is the Oban. It's Oban 18-year-old. This got 98 points, that went through 8 judges, and the average score, which means some of the judges must have given it 100.
Actually, two did, Francis.
There you go. So, and I don't know, maybe I was one of them. I don't know.
You might have been, actually.
So Paul does keep these things blind, but after 8 judges, 4 different panels of 2 judges each, the average score was 98. So talk to us about this whiskey. Talk to us about Oban.
This is a distillery owned by Diageo PCL in London. It's on the western coast of Scotland.
So different.
In a town called Oban. It's a very idiosyncratic town. I absolutely adore it. I think if Sue and I were ever to move to Scotland, which certainly isn't out of the realm of possibility, that would be a town I would really consider. So what's interesting about this, it is labeled as a Western Highlands single malt, but because it's right on the ocean, it's right on the North Sea, it's a coastal town, I actually consider this a maritime influence single malt. And by that, I mean a single malt whose aging warehouses are near the ocean, and they pick up a little bit of the sea breeze, a little bit of the salt air. It's just a beautiful town. It's very quirky in that right over the distillery, there is a replica of the Roman Colosseum. Why, we don't know, but it is there. And anytime you walk into town, you can't help but smile looking at this replica. And it's brilliant, but the people are lovely. The distillery hasn't changed. I first went there, I think in 1990, probably on my second or third trip to Scotland back in the day. And anytime I've been there, Sue and I were there last, I think about 6-7 years ago, hasn't changed at all. Everything is the same. They don't make a lot. Most of what they make goes off to making blends for Diageo, but the little bit that they hold back for single malt bottlings is extraordinarily special. And I was so pleased to see this whiskey, as Francis was saying, go through these 4 very difficult panels and come out just such a star. So this is the Chairman's Trophy winner for the Highlands region. And please tell me what you think about it.
Do you guys get that little bit of sea air that Paul's talking about? That little
Maritime.
you know, that I don't want to say brininess because that's not really what I'm saying, but that little salt air. You can smell it in the whiskey.
It's got a real saline character, very minerally too. It's really a lovely
Incredible.
austere whiskey.
One I had. This is really, it's very subtle. All of it is there. The pity, the salt air, all of it is there, but none of it is in your face. All of it is completely balanced.
I'd agree.
Yeah, the other whiskey I think was
Incredible.
more in your face than this whiskey. Okay,
Yeah.
definitely. You know, that's the other whiskey was a little more viscous and a little more, you know, that melted butter was a little more in the whiskey. This whiskey is just lovely and balanced, and you know that tiny little bit of brininess.
If my wife wouldn't be here, I would right now light up a Monte Cristo.
Yes, yes.
But she
I
is.
get that too.
You're good.
But
I think you might have some more favorable Monte Cristo scotches coming.
Very nice. How old is this whiskey?
18 years.
18 years.
So, but
In the same way for 18 years, or do they switch things up?
no, it's in the same barrel, American oak, American white oak barrel that formerly had aged some bourbon. And that's particularly, I think that this is probably a second or a third fill, meaning that whiskeys have been in these barrels before. They have leached out a lot of the char, a lot of the sweetness of the barrel. And that's why this is so dry. It's dry for 2 reasons. One, because I think they're barrels that have been used before and a lot of the impurities have been leached out. And secondly, it's the sea air that adds a little bit of saltiness that makes it dry.
There's another character that I find here that I think is really predominant. So that first Dewar's was super aromatic and kind of really jumped out of the glass at you, whereas this is a little more reserved aromatically, but the weight on the palate and there's kind of a focus on a fruitcake, kind of candied fruits or dried fruits in the middle of this, which is one of the reasons I think it would go so well with the cigar. But that like fruitcake note to it, and with the weight of dried fruits in there, is just stunning. And it's a little, though it wasn't aged in wine cast, it's a little winey. It's a little more winey than the first one.
This feels north of 90, Paul. Is it?
I don't think it is.
43%.
Yeah.
43?
43.
They typically like 43. That's their sweet spot.
Got it.
I'm speaking for Francis because I'm guessing a little bit here, but when you come into the restaurant, if you're looking for a Scotch recommendation, I think the first whiskey that we had, that Dewar's 27, is more likely a whiskey that I'm going to recommend, and this Oban 18 is more likely one that Francis will recommend. Just stylistically, no. Yes,
I could drink both of these all night.
Yes,
long.
you could drink both of these all night
But I think
long,
that's
for
right.
sure. No, I mean I love them both. You know, but this is stylistically, I see this as a Francis Scotch.
Couldn't choose. Sophie's choice moment. Couldn't choose. Anybody else want to say anything about one of these 2 whiskeys before we move on to the next one? Well, great. So let's move on to the next.
I'm sorry, could I just go back to, and I hate to backtrack, but with the blends, when Dale was asking about the change in the blends from way back in the 70s, and I know you said the malt to grain balance has changed. If you're going as far back as the 70s, has the profile between sherry cask and bourbon cask, because isn't the 70s around when Spain stopped shipping sherry in casks, and so they started having to use bourbon casks more?
It's an excellent point, and you're spot on. Bourbon barrels that formerly housed or stored bourbon started flowing into Scotland at that point, probably around 1973. And they have now, bourbon barrels, ex-bourbon barrels have become the predominant barrel type because of that. And also because keep in mind that by law, straight bourbon must be aged in new charred oak barrels.
Exactly.
They can only be used once.
So
That's it.
they're
They
selling
have to go somewhere.
anybody that'll buy
So
them.
every year there is this plethora of available barrels.
Right.
And honestly, more and more, right? We're drinking more bourbon than
And
we've
more
ever
and
drunk.
more.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's a very economical way for the Scots to age their whiskeys. But they also have this constant flow coming in. Whereas with sherry, it's the opposite. It's very, very difficult now to get sherry casks. And sherry casks typically cost 6 to 7 times more than what a bourbon cask would cost. So purely from an economical side, it makes sense that the predominant type of cask right now in Scotland is bourbon, ex-bourbon.
And
What
I
about the
think
portwood?
Yeah, to less degrees, there's portwood around. Certainly started by my friend Dr. Bill Lumsden at Glenmorangie, who was really the leader in wood finishing experiments back in the mid 90s. But again, this is a business, and getting port and sherry wood and Madeira wood or Bordeaux casks or Burgundy casks to finish the aging process is a very expensive proposition. So, and now with the tariffs that are really biting into Scotch whiskey availability here, that's even more predominant, that they're more cost conscious.
Well, and also I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but it's my impression that when you age something in a ex-port barrel or an ex-Madeira barrel, that's kind of it doesn't spend most of its life in that. You kind of finish it in a barrel like that for a year or two, because when it extracts port or Madeira from a barrel, it's kind of an exotic. It's not really classic down the middle Scotch whiskey. It's more of a more aggressive flavoring agent. So when you see a portwood finished whiskey like the Glenmorangie that started in the 90s, that started the whole thing, it actually looked a little red, looked a little purple. Yeah. And so that's when you're looking for a portwood finished Scotch, that's a specific thing. It's it's not a flavored vodka, but it's toward, it's an exotic. So let's.
Julie.
One of my favorite ones in that category is a 21-year-old portwood finish.
Julie, this is going to make a much drier Rob Roy, this Oban, isn't it?
I'll try that one next.
We're taking this off your paycheck next week, Julie.
I don't think so.
Anybody wants a $50 Rob Roy can run in. Okay, let's move on to the next. And by the way, just before we leave it, the Oban is one of the smallest single malt distilleries that you'll find, and the production, as Paul said, most of that does not go to single malt. So it's really, though it's owned by a big company, it's a specialty small product. So the next whiskey, we're going from Highland to Speyside. And can you talk to us a little bit about? I love this Glenrothes. It's also 43%. It's 18 years old. It's got 98 points in the Ultimate Spirits Challenge. And talk to us about Highland versus Speyside and the regions and the role of regions and what you're looking for differently in this whiskey.
Well, Speyside is the region that is kind of right in the heart of Scotland. Bear in mind that mainland Scotland, no place in Scotland is more than 70 miles from the ocean. So there might even be, if there's a very, very windy situation, like the months of March and April are extremely windy in Scotland, there's always some sea breeze coming in from somewhere. But Speyside is probably the area right in the heart of Scotland, of mainland Scotland, where the greatest, first of all, the greatest concentration of distilleries are, because of how the glens go. There's so many rivers and burns and streams and springs And of course, the most important thing for any distillery is the availability of water. Without water, you can't run a distillery. So you need lots of water. So you'll find as you travel through, particularly through the Speyside area, that virtually every distillery is located either on the Spey River, near the Spey River, or in glens that have streams, tributaries running to the Spey River. The Spey River is the fastest flowing river in Great Britain. So it's a very dramatic place to see, to go and visit, quite wonderful. Glenrothes is in the in the small little beautiful village of Rothes. And the distillery itself is actually bisected by a stream. So there's the production side on one side where the distillery and the kiln are. And then on the other side of the stream is where the warehouse is. So it gets made on one side of the stream and they move it over to the other side of the stream to age. The thing about Glenrothes that I've always liked so much is the shape of their stills. The shape of a still is a key element to the final product of the spirit. Small squat stills like in Highland Park in the Orkneys or in Macallan are stills that produce very intense whiskey. Tall stills like the ones at Glenmorangie or the ones at Glenrothes, for instance, produce more ethereal, lighter, but still complex types of whiskeys. So Glenrothes, because of the size of the tallness of their still, and also because they employ a very slow distillation process. They don't like to hurry their distillation. Their distillation typically will take 1.5 times as long as most other Speyside distilleries. And the reason they do that is because they want a very light, very approachable style of whiskey. And I think they achieve that. It's always been a favorite distillery of mine. They prefer barrels that have been seasoned with sherry. Not necessarily do they have all barrels that used to have sherry in them aging, but they like to season their barrels with sherry to have that winey prune-like quality. And this 18-year-old that the judging panels just went apeshit over, really it just checks all those boxes.
Also 98 points, I will add.
98, yeah. Just what do you think of this one?
You want to jump in?
Yeah, it's like butter caramel popcorn, and the prune is all over it, Paul.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like every butterscotch producer in the world should have to drink this before they make their butterscotch.
What I find really striking here is that like the graham cracker kind of note to it that is just really striking.
Yeah.
The dry graham cracker kind of graininess to it that I find. This to me, this call's being recorded, but we can get in trouble whenever we use gender. But I think that there's a usefulness to respectfully gendering spirits and wines and and this is very kind of masculine style, and it's very lean and muscular. And I think that graham kind of structure to it is different. I didn't see in either of the other two whiskeys we have in it. I think it's singular and lovely.
If any of you ever get a chance to roam through the Speyside region of Scotland, stop by Glenrothes. It's a lovely, lovely place. And what you'll no matter where you are standing in the compound of Glenrothes, you will hear water running everywhere, rushing. And that's because they use 5 water sources, a combination of wells and springs, and there's water coming at you wherever you are. And it just is the perfect illustration of how back in the late 1400s and early 1500s, many of these locations were first mapped out and were first blueprinted to be the perfect spot for a distillery. just because the need for so much water during the distillation process.
And to touch on Paul's point about the size and shape of the stills and how interesting it is, what stills are made of and how they're shaped unquestionably affects the spirit that is turned into a vapor and then turned back into a liquid. And there are people writing PhD theses on what exactly is accomplished, and most of them say, yeah, we still don't freaking know, right? So the idea of, we know general rules, but that's why when people buy old stills, or if somebody has to move a still from one distillery to another, they take it apart very carefully. And if there was a dent in it that was put in there 90 years ago, they leave the freaking dent in it, okay? It's like the shape of the still is important in ways we still don't quite understand, down to the, like oak age, like barrel aging. We still don't quite understand everything. And that's great, right? So when Paul's talking about the shape of the stills, when you look at a distillery and they talk about having old stills, that will provide a consistent character. And I think that's the magic of this whole thing, you know?
I got a quick question. These stills, what is the material of construction?
It's copper, 100% copper.
Okay.
And the reason that's a really good question, because stills in the past have been made from everything from wood logs, which wood logs were used in the early days here in Kentucky and Tennessee and Maryland and Pennsylvania. Yeah. But metal is always the best conductor of heat. And when you distill something, the whole idea is to bring the liquid to a boil. And you bring it to a boil so that you could separate the alcohol from the water and the other compounds. And since alcohol boils at a lower temperature than water, that's where you get vapors. And when the still is heated, usually on all sides underneath, to get maximum heat concentration, copper has been found to be just the best conductor of heat for stills. Mm-hmm. The other aspect about copper that's so attractive to distilling, to the whole distilling industry, from cognac to Canada to Scotland, Ireland, the United States, Japan, is it's a malleable metal, so you can shape it. And that's really the key, as Francis was saying, the shape of the still is really a key element of the final product.
And are these vessels jacketed with like water jacket or fennel or something, or is it just heat directly added, or is it like a water? I'm guessing it could have some water jacketing on it.
Not in Scotland.
Okay.
No, they just do direct heating either by gas or steam.
Water jacketing is something you see happen when there's fermentation of wine going on. So very often right. Fermentation, because the fermentation itself creates heat.
Sure.
Basically, the wine can cook itself. And so if you age something in stainless steel, you might water jacket it to lower the temperature of fermentation to slow it down. But in distilling, you're just adding heat to the liquid itself is not generating any heat. It's just receiving the heat that you're putting on it. So I think we should go on to the next one because we do have an hour. We should go to our fourth whiskey.
Francis,
yes.
I would just say that I think the nose on this is a wonderful introduction.
Amazing.
Amazing.
I really do. It's great.
I agree. And I
amazing.
Totally agree.
I mean, and frankly, again, for me, that Glenrothes is right in my wheelhouse. That is, it's got everything, right? It literally has everything.
So the next whiskey is one that's, I don't know, Paul, if you know this, but there's a town right next to us called Highland Park, New Jersey. So whenever we have Highland Park behind the bar, we sell a lot of it. I'm not sure it's because of the merits of the whiskey, but people love it. It is a fantastic whiskey. And we're making a big change here because when we talk about regions in Scotland, when we talk about regions in France or Germany, it's because wine is a much less manufactured product than whiskey is, right? We have to intervene a lot more and we change it from the nature of the agricultural material much more when we're making a whiskey. Whereas with wine, winemakers are only doing a few things and they're trying to preserve the terroir of the piece of ground the grape grew in for the most part in the wine. With whiskey, however, we do have weather characteristics that affect the fermentation and the distillation. But even more importantly, one of the whiskey is aged. It's what happens in the barrel that really makes a huge amount of difference. And so here we're taking a change in regions. This is an island malt. So there are lots of islands around Scotland, but these are the Orkney Islands in the north, up by the North Sea. And Highland Park is on Kirkwall, which regularly gets 100-mile-an-hour freezing winds in the wintertime. And those freezing winds, being that they're on an island, is blowing salty sea air, and not just a little bit, right? Like batten down the hatches, so when we talk about regions in Scotland, there are two things that are going on. One is there are different traditions in different regions, but it's not like, Burgundy versus the Rhone Valley, that you can only do this here and you can only do that there. So there are stylistic differences that people are free to depart from. There's no regulation. And then there is also if you're going to age something on the Orkney Islands, it's going to be very different than when you age in Speyside, which is in very inland appellation as far as Scotland goes. So I love island whiskeys, and was happy to see this Highland Park 21-year-old. It's a whiskey we've carried for years. Will you talk to us about this particular whiskey, Paul?
Boy, I almost feel like a spokesperson for this, even though I'm certainly not paid by them, not paid by anybody. But if I had to choose one distillery out of all the distilleries in the world of any type of spirit, vodka, cognac, Armagnac, whiskeys, bourbon, Canadian whiskeys, if I had to choose one distillery that I thought did it better than anybody else, it would be the Highland Park people and Gordon Motion, who is the master distiller. And I say that because their lineup of single malts over the years, and again, keeping in mind, I am an asshole when it comes to being a critic. I am not easy, but the reality is, over the years, Highland Park has been the one distillery that has just sent me exemplary spirits time after time. And in our book that's coming out in next May.
You got the title of the book, Paul? Tell us what the title is.
The new Kindred Spirits, more than 2,000 new reviews of all spirits. The Highland Park 18 is the spirit that I believe is the best spirit of all time out of the 30-some thousand that I've reviewed. And this Highland Park 21 that won the Chairman's Trophy for Island single malts, it was no surprise. I'll be honest, it was up against, I think, upwards of 25 to 30 other island malts. And it was no surprise to me. If this wasn't going to win, I figured the 18 might win or the 25-year-old might win. So why is this particular distillery so special? What is it? A lot of it is where it is. There are only 2 distilleries located on the main island of the Orkneys, and that one is Scapa and the other is Highland Park. Francis brought up the term terroir in reference to wine, meaning the influence of the place of origin. Does Scotch whiskey, does any spirit have a terroir effect, have the effect of an influence from its place of origin? I think if any Scotch whiskey had that, it would be this one. And again, it was just because of what Francis said. The Orkneys are virtually under gale warning conditions all the time. It is windy all the time there. So the constant flow of salt air going through the warehouses of Highland Park in the town of Kirkwall is constant. I remember years ago, the New York Times asked me to write about a quirky story from Scotch whiskey land. And So I had heard about a ghost that inhabited the warehouse of Highland Park. And so I asked my friends at Highland Park, would you mind if I spent the night in this particular warehouse?
I want to do that. I so want to do that.
And they, of course, they thought I was crazy. You know, the American journalist, again, has lost his mind. But they were kind, and they only laughed behind their backs. So they set up a cot for me in the warehouse. And by law, you have to lock the warehouses in Scotland at night. That's just law. Everyone is locked. So at 8 o'clock, they locked the warehouse, and I was in there, and everything was fine. The aromas, of course, were enchanting. And I spent the night, and I dozed off on the cot. And at 2:33 in the morning, and I know this because I looked at my watch, I heard this crash as this huge wind came blowing through the warehouse. And I thought, my God, this place, it was shaking. The wind was so strong. And so I got back to sleep after about an hour. And I was kind of disappointed because the ghost didn't show up. And I figured, geez, the Times is going to be pissed off at me because there's no ghost story here. So when Ian Anderson, the security man for Highland Park, opened the lock on the warehouse at 7 the next morning, and I was kind of waiting for him, and I said, Ian, man, that wind last night was unbelievable. Did you hear it about 2:30 in the morning? And he went, oh no, Paul, I was up all night, you know, and there wasn't a breath of wind all night. And I said, Ian, the warehouse was shaking at 2:33. And he went, oh, Paul, I think you saw the ghost. So I've had this love affair with Highland Park for a long time, but it's not because of that. It's because of the high grade of whiskey that they make. I think it's unparalleled, actually.
Hey, Paul, I know you're a cognac lover too, but for me, Highland Park is to island scotches what Delamain is to Grand Champagne cognac. And I know you'll know what I mean.
Yeah, that's a great parallel, I think. And again, it comes down to the provenance, the fact that their stills are also, they only have 4 stills, 2 wash stills and 2 spirit stills. Oh. And they are very squat. And that's why I assume you've all tasted this as my lips have been flapping. But this is really intense stuff. And it's intense mostly because of the small stills. They're very concentrated. So when the vapors come out, the vapors are very, very high in alcohol and they carry with them a lot of the compounds, the natural compounds of the barley malt. And that's why this is so viscous. The other thing that's important, let me just, one more thing. The other thing that's important about Highland Park is the peat that they use for their kiln to dry the barley malt comes from their own land. It's called Hobbister Moor. So they know the source of where the peat is all the time. And that's a really key element. And what do you think of this?
No.
Well, I want to say to people who haven't done it yet, I've tasted all these whiskeys by themselves, and I've added a little bit of water. This whiskey just exploded when I added the water to it. It just absolutely just grew and grew and grew in the glass when I added water to it.
Actually, I'm going to do that.
I just experimented the same thing. I did it, and it's true. Bam! It came alive.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's 46% alcohol out of the bottle, but that addition of just a splash of water doesn't need a lot. But you're right. The tastes just explode.
And Paul, I don't think you're crazy at all for locking yourself in there, because we went to the Tokaj region in Hungary, and we went a mile deep into the Tokaj mountain, and there was a chamber in a cellar, a knight's chamber where they crowned the king of Hungary at one point in 1400, and I begged to be locked in there, and they would not trust me with it. They said too easy to get to the wine.
Yeah. Well, so I think what's interesting is this idea of there being a terroir or a tradition, whether tradition or weather driven. You know, the terroir I think hits more in the aging than anything else. And again, you're talking about a manufactured product. So I think when you see and you want to talk about terroir, and who knows whether we're right or wrong, it's only really in the most extreme circumstances that it will have an effect. And this is one of the most extreme environments that in which you can make whiskey. And, you know, like great wine is made from stressed grapes. Very often the most interesting things come out of the most stressful environments. And this is one of them. So listen, I want to give everybody a little frame of reference here. The Dewar's double 27-year-old, 97 points, is a half bottle. It only comes in half bottles, 375 milliliter bottles. And it's $114.95 a half bottle. You can get these from us. I'm not going to generally carry many of them to sell, but if you want to make a Christmas present for somebody or you want to take it for yourself, I'll get these for you. I'll send you an email either tonight after we leave here, or because as you can see, we decided not to do this from the comfort of our office. I'll send you an email where you can pick these up from here. And I'm somewhat limited on what I can get, but I think I can get a couple of bottles of each of these more. The Oban 18 is $139.95. The Glenrothes 18, that's for a full bottle. The Glenrothes 18 is $139.95 as well. And the Highland Park 21-year-old is $329.95 for a 750 milliliter bottle. So just to give you an idea of where the prices are on these things, because that's relevant. Shall we move on to the next whiskey?
You can sign me up for a Dewar's. I'll take one.
Okay, I have one in stock. I'll set it aside for you. Pop in whenever you want.
Before you move on, can I ask what the score was for the Highland Park?
Oh yeah, the score for the Highland Park was 97 points.
Because it still lingers on my palate. It's amazing. It certainly beats the first three.
Yeah,
there's very, very little of the 21-year-old just because the virtue of its age.
Right.
It's very rare, and that's why it's so costly at $300 plus.
Sure. All right. So the next
thing before we move on.
Well, it's sure, please.
You had mentioned terroir, and Paul had mentioned a little bit about how the Highland Park, their peat is farmed locally. I have found, and I'm curious if some of you with a lot more experience than I agree, that peat definitely has a terroir to it. So like Isla peat, Island peat has a very different characteristic than, say, Highland peat. I actually had a craft distillery whiskey from upstate New York that was made with their local peat, and I find a vast difference in the more floral or more medicinal iodine characteristic that's common in the Isla malts. And I'm just wondering if that's my imagination or
No.
if you guys see that as well.
No, it's not your imagination at all. I've done a lot of articles on peat, the effect of peat, why peat was used to begin with to dry barley malt. And you're right, it's a very regional, localized aspect. And they each do have very distinct qualities to them. One of the stories that I did for the Times, probably in the mid 90s, was on working different jobs in distilleries. And one of the jobs that I did was digging peat in Speyside. And the peat in Speyside was very floral and very aromatic. And then I dug some peat on the Isle of Islay off the west coast of Scotland. And the peat there was extremely saline, extremely salty. And again, it's because it was influenced by the ocean.
And so I've never cut peat in Scotland, and I've never cut peat anyway. I'm more like, people always say, oh, Francis, you're a wine expert. Do you want to come and work the harvest? I'm like, no freaking way. I want to sit in the porch and have cocktails and watch other people work the harvest. That's really hard work. I wear a suit, okay? That's my job in this whole thing, So I don't have shoes even that I could do that in, But I have seen peat cut in Ireland, and the peat is so different in the northern counties of Ireland, in Central Ireland, and in Western Ireland. I've never been to Western Ireland, but I've read about Western Ireland. But I've seen peat cut in the north and in the south, and it's so different in texture that the tools they use. There's a northern kind of a peat cutter, and the southern peat. So in the north, it has a little hook on it because it's been different for forever. Because these the traditional way that you cut peat, which is backbreaking, terrible, horrible work. The tool itself is different, and it's been different for hundreds of years. And so, and that expresses in the way it burns and the character of the smoke. And if you smell, and if you go to Ireland today or Scotland today, usually when people have a peat fire, they get coal bricks like that you can buy in the market, right? But people who cut their own peat, that's pretty rare. But you can smell. When you burn peat, it burns dirty, and so that's why it's kind of frowned upon. But if you walk through a village and someone's burning peat, you smell the whole street smells like they're burning peat, and it's very different if you're in different places. And of course, it would express in the whiskey. That was a great question. It was a super awesome question.
Dale has heard this story a million times, so Dale, forgive me. But when I was cutting peat in Speyside, all those years ago, and I asked the owner of the peat field, Edward Stewart, I said, Edward, for my readers back in the States, give me a definition of peat in one sentence. And he said, oh, Paul, that's real easy. Peat is vegetation that's halfway to becoming coal.
Right, and that's why it burns so dirty. But
Great, thank you, Edward.
There's a whole history of peat, and because in Ireland people were poor and there weren't any trees, and if you didn't cut peat in the summertime, you didn't have the way to heat your house in the wintertime. And if it rained while you're harvesting the peat, it could wash it all away. It's a crazy story. But we're running out of time, so we need to go to the next malt. And I think one of the really interesting things about in Scotch, we're going to a category of whiskey called a blended malt, which used to be called a vatted malt, which nobody ever understood to begin with. But then they changed the rules to make it simpler, which made it just more complicated. So now really nobody understands what the hell's going on, because it's a blended malt, but that's different than a blended whiskey. So they made it harder. Will you talk to us, Paul, about what is a blended malt that used to be called a vatted malt that's not a blended whiskey?
Well, let's go back and define what a blended Scotch whiskey is. That combination of grain whiskeys made from high alcohol distillate made from wheat or corn, and 100% barley malt single grain or single malt whiskeys. So those are the combination of the two. Blended malts is 100% single malt whiskey, but from two or more distilleries that are blended together. So it was actually better when they had the moniker of vatted malts years ago. And when the Scotch Whisky Association started discussing, well, let's change the name to blended malt, writers, myself, the late Michael Jackson, John Hansel, Dave Broom, we all sent letters or called them saying, don't do this. Calling it blended malt is too close to blended Scotch whiskey. It's just going to create confusion. Of course, the Scotch Whisky Association, in their infinite stupidity, did not listen to us. And so they ended up calling it blended malt.
It worked. It created confusion.
It was just such a stupid move. And so I don't know how many times a year I have to explain this, but that's the definition. But so, this one is by a producer who is actually like a negociant in France who purchases barrels of single malt whiskey and then blends them together on his own. And this particular expression from Weems, Weems is spelled W-E-M-Y-S-S. Weems, this is Weems peat chimney. So if you smell kind of a smoky quality or cigarette ash kind of quality, or iodine, or maybe toasted marshmallow. That's what that is. It's the high concentration of peat smoke that was used to dry the barley malt.
I think it's pretty extraordinary. And again, the distinction is a blended whiskey is malted barley and other things can be in it. It's not necessarily 100% malted, like a malted barley in the whiskey. A blended malt is just a blend of single malts. So this is a single malt Scotch. It's just not from a single. It's a 100% malted Scotch, but not from a single distillery. So that's a big difference. And this is one of my favorite categories, and always has been. And one of the reasons is I think it often, and there are many, and there used to be more, that it provides some of the best values in all of Scotch whiskey. Is the blended malts.
Yeah.
Because nobody knows what the hell it is, but it's also.
I'll tell you that in all the whiskeys we've tasted, this is probably my least favorite, but I think is the best value, on the table. This is a $40 bottle of Scotch.
Yeah.
Okay. This is not a $300 bottle of Scotch. It's not a $140 bottle. This is a $40 bottle of Scotch, and I think there's a ton of value in a bottle like this.
What he said. Paul,
What do you guys like this?
yeah, what do you guys think? Let's start out the
what's-
panel. Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Oh, thumbs up. You know, when it comes to
My
these
least
kind of,
favorite.
Your least favorite, but it's also half the price of the next cheapest one. Or third of the
Truthfully,
price of the next cheapest one.
it is my least favorite of the Scotches we're tasting, but I think it's a tremendous value at $40.
What do we know now? We know Bill's not a cheap date. That's what we know. Don't climb into this crap and you come over his house. Drop $100 or don't come over for dinner. That's all. And I want.
But
I
if
think
you
blended
walk up
malts
to a
are-
bar and this is the happy hour
Yeah, $40.
whiskey on the house whiskey, you're gonna say you had a good whiskey.
Absolutely.
I agree. If you can, and I just put, and honestly, at $40, Dale, wouldn't you make this into a cocktail? A blood and sand made with this?
well, I wouldn't make it into a cocktail because it's got too much peat, but you know what? This is a style that some people just are in love with. I mean, the guy who loves Lafroig is going to love this.
Yeah.
It's just, it
Yeah,
is what
yeah,
it is,
true.
you know. And
I mean, it's just
if you
$10
don't
for
like
the
that
Johnny Walker
style,
record.
and it's the least favorite. I mean, this is why they created blended Scotch right here back in the 19th century.
It's a one-note wonder. Because it's a one-note wonder. But I have to say, I like in the blood and sand, which Phil, that you introduced me to so many years ago. I do like a very peaty whiskey. So honestly, Dewar's White Label is our kind of go-to for a blood and sand. We'll also use Deanston single malt sometimes. And this whiskey, I like that, what that delivers in a cocktail. But what I'm saying is, this is on the borderline price-wise of it's a whiskey you can sip, and a lot of your friends who are like, oh, I love peat. Is this as good as Lafroig? No, it's not as good as Lafroig. Is it as good as Lagavulin? No, it's not as good as Lagavulin. But you can't. But for $40, it's a great whiskey, and it is. Dale's right. It's a one-note wonder. But
And by the way, this is a 96 point Scotch. Okay.
Wow.
This is not a slouch. This is a 90 point Scotch.
39.
I think it's a good introduction to peat also.
Yeah. And it's also because it's a one-note wonder. One of the things I find, because we teach classes all the time to the trade as well as to consumers, one of the things we try to find is something that has a singular note, right? And so I'll say, okay, this is peat. Remember this, and I'll pour 2 whiskeys that have peat and then 1 whiskey that has none at all. I would totally use this as a lesson because people want to isolate. Oh, that's peat. I'll remember that. I'll remember that as part of my vocabulary. Okay, let's move on to the next. My favorite region of Scotland, my favorite whiskeys are from Islay. My favorite distillery, which is not represented here, is Cowell Islay. I can drink stuff all day long, every expression of everything they do.
It's an Irish name.
It's not an Irish name, it's a Scottish. You know what Mark does every year, all the time? He mixes up.
Sounds Irish.
He mixes up Irish and Scottish. He's like, oh, there's Scottish, right? I'm like, no, that's Irish. Anyway.
Just so you guys know, I do that mostly to piss Francis.
I know. It's great. So anyway, it's like we call a German winemaker Austrian. He's like, I'm not Austrian. So the single malt here is from the Islay, Now, Isla in Deutliga means island, but this is not an island malt. We're talking about a specific island, which is Isla. Isla traditionally, and there's no reason that they have to do this, but traditionally Isla malts, you will find a lot of more heavily peated whiskey from Isla. But there's nothing about Isla that makes that have to happen, and there are some unpeated whiskeys from Isla. But it is kind of the tradition there. And this is from the Kikkoman distillery, which sounds a lot like a soy sauce, but it's not. It's a Scottish distillery on the island of Isla. And this is their Seneg, which they have a couple of different bottlings that are coming into the country, and they're all great. Kikkoman is just, it's a stunning distillery. And this is the Seneg, 97 points. Paul, talk to us about this whiskey.
Wow.
Well, Isla is important in terms of, since we started talking about peat, Isla, the 37% of the topography of Isla is peat. So all of the water sources that the distilleries use have water that is basically this color. And it's that brownish, brackish color just because it is flowing through peat constantly. The good side of that, and the first time I went to Isla, of course, I was horrified being the ugly American thinking, my God, the bath water looks like shit. But the good thing about the water flowing through peat is the fact that it's a filtration. Peat is a filter. So the water that's coming out the other side going to the distilleries is extremely soft. And soft water is great for distillation. So water that's soft typically boils a lot faster than hard water because it doesn't have so many minerals in it. And so actually, I believe the pronunciation is Kilchoman. And Kilchoman is a new entity, and they have come on the market in a big way because they are winning all sorts of awards and stealing a little bit of the thunder from well-established Isla distilleries like Bowmore, and Dale and knows all of these, Lagavulin, Ardbeg, Lafroig, Kalila, Bruichladdich, Bunnahabhain. All of these have been around a lot longer than Kilchoman. But now this new kid comes on the block and is just winning award after award after award. Why is that? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I haven't been to the distillery, so I'm not in a position to say or to voice an opinion of their production standards. But I have to say, they enter the last 5 or 6 years, they've entered into Ultimate Spirits Challenge. Francis and I have been tasting them for that long, and they just keep winning. And so they're doing something right. It's either their choice of wood, maturation, the level of peat that they allow, as measured in parts per million of phenols. They're doing the right thing. So it's a very exciting distillery to keep an eye on.
How old are they?
2005. They were established in 2005.
Yeah, just now.
Oh, wow.
15
15
years.
I meant to ask you earlier, does any of the other companies use carbon filtration for water purification?
No.
Wow, that's interesting.
No.
So what I get here, to me, why I think this is winning so many awards, it's so distinctive. Okay, you have the peat coming through on top, and you know, you have a lot of very peaty whiskeys from this region of the world, but there is a fruit undertone that shines through all that peat that I don't always get in scotches from this region.
You get it in Lagavulin too, and it's got a finesse that like Lagavulin has.
I agree.
Well, I think these two whiskeys were great to try side by side because what Dale pointed out was the last whiskey was really a one-note wonder. It was everything supported the peat, and it was singularly the peat. And here there's a term that I use and a lot of spirits writers and judges and even wine writers and judges use when they talk about either oak in wine or peat in whiskey. And there's enough whiskey here. It has digested the peat. It has the peat is woven into the fabric of this whiskey in a way that, there was, the other whiskey was peat. You had big, here's the whiskey and the peat's up here. And this whiskey is a whole in which peat's a predominant part, but it's woven into the fabric of the whiskey, and it's
got a
not
complexity.
And a richness, and it all works together. It's not a one-note wonder. It's a symphony. Does that?
What's the price point on this, Francis? Because I would assume it's the price point on this one.
Ready? 2005.
Yeah.
And before I'm going to give you the price point, I'd say one other thing about Kilcolman, which is it's interesting for a new distillery. They're a new distillery that's really trying to do stuff in the old-fashioned way. So the barley that they make the whiskey from, check this out, is grown on site. It's estate-grown barley. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, it's nuts, right? And the other thing is most whiskey distilleries, even good ones, and there's nothing wrong with this, they purchase malted barley, right? So. Sorry. It's here. You can get in your car. You can get an Uber. You can be here shortly. So
not get in my car now. Thank you very much.
All right, an Uber. I suggest an Uber. But the other thing is they have a malt.
We're in Highland Park. We can come and get it pretty quick.
Yeah, well, we're here. So they have a malting floor. So they malt their own barley. And just a quick primer on how rare this is. Very few houses do this anymore. They buy malted barley. So not only they grow their own barley, they malt their own barley. What does that mean? It means they have a malting floor, which all the distilleries used to have, but most haven't had in dozens of years. And you have a big concrete floor in a round house with windows that airflow through it, and you hose down your barley. And you do that, and you kind of rake it back and forth in such a way that what you want your barley to start to sprout, because throwing grains with yeast won't do anything. But if the barley starts to just sprout a little bit, that will allow fermentation to begin to occur. So that's what malted barley means. Well, most people purchase already malted barley, and then when it starts to malt, which is you can either plant it and grow more barley, or you can stop it somehow by drying it out, whether it's in a kiln, whether you allow the peat to touch it into the smoke environment to get there at that point, or you seal it off from the peat so there's no peat influence, and you raise the temperature and dry it to stop that malted barley from becoming seeds that you should plant. And these guys have their own malting floor. They malt their own barley, which is, I don't think there are 5 distilleries in Scotland that still malt their own barley. Did I get that wrong, Paul?
Actually, there are 5.
Well, there you go. All right. So I missed it by 1. I would have been right if I said I don't think there is.
Let me share a story.
If he had said I can count on one hand, he would have been correct.
Exactly. Anyway, so I want to say, before I tell you the price, what do you think of this whiskey overall? The last one we think didn't quite rise to the same level as the rest of the whiskeys here. Does this whiskey rate with all these other, prestige whiskeys?
Yes. That's lovely.
Thumbs up or thumbs down? Everybody has to vote, or I'm not talking anymore.
Thumbs up.
All right.
These are good.
Mediums. I got some thumbs up. I got.
I give you a thumbs up.
I still rather drink it.
No video, but we got thumbs up.
All right. So we have a divided opinion, but when I tell you that this bottle is $64.95.
Bargain.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And Kilcolman, I keep saying Kilcolman, which is the soy sauce. Kilcolman, I'm amazed by them. And I'd never heard of them until 4 years ago. And a friend of ours brings them in. If you've been on our wine dinners, Harmon Skurnick has been on our wine dinners a number of times. The Skurnick brothers import this whiskey. And when Mark and I went to their first tastings, we were like, okay, color me skeptical. A brand new house that's less, at that time, 10 years old is getting into the Scotch whiskey business. And we were wrong. We were dead wrong. And they continue to impress time after time. So this is the Seneg. They have a number of different marks that they bottle, and it's awesome. So,
hey, Francis, I have to share a story with you going back to the Oban. One of my clients is Holland America Cruise Lines, and I'm on the ships a lot. Not these days, but I was. And part of my duties, besides doing the menus and training the staff, is to hang out with the guests at the bar and just talk about the drinks and stuff. And this retired Marine and his wife, probably from Indiana or something, very American. And they haul themselves up to the bar, and he goes, 2 Oban neat with water back. Man, it stopped me in my shoes. And I said, wow, I didn't expect to hear that order from you. He and his wife, right? Said, oh yeah, we love the stuff. And I said, well, how'd you get to be Oban drinkers? He said, well, we're in Scotland, when we pulled into this place, we were hungry and we were looking for something to eat. So we ordered 2 Obans. We thought they were sandwiches. We really liked them.
Well, Oban and a Reuben, they work all right. Listen.
As the one-liner from Demi Moore in one of the movies was that I would like 2 Monte Cristos, 1 on a rye, 1 a ring.
What was the last thing you said? You cut off there.
One on a rye and 1 with ring 50, ring size 50.
I hear you. All right, so before we close, I want a show of hands. I'm just curious, and look, because Americans have to do this, like Europeans don't do this, but I'm really curious what everybody, and regardless of price, I'm going to ask everyone to give a thumbs up when I give your favorite whiskey, because I'm really curious what everyone has to say. I think everyone wants to see. No, you can't. You just can't vote for all 6. You have to pick one, and I want everyone and call if I hope it would impinge upon your impartiality if you could participate.
Paul's already told you what his favorite is, but we'll continue on.
Well, he told the favorite house. He didn't tell the favorite whiskey today. All right. Who chooses as the favorite whiskey of the wines, which is not to say best, but your favorite whiskey that if I was going to send you a bottle for Christmas, and by the way, in prior years we might have, but this particular year, the restaurateurs are not sending you anything.
You're getting nothing
you to
from
come
us.
here. You're getting nothing from us.
Sorry.
Morgan, I sent a letter recently, like we always get to so many charities all the time. And recently somebody sent us a letter and they said, would you consider donating to the, ballet or wherever? I'm like, we've changed our policies on donations. We're accepting them now. So if you'd like to send them, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, we'd actually like you to bring the empty bottles back to us from this tasting, if you don't mind.
All right, so here's how we're going to end, and then we'll say a few words to whose favorite whiskey of the night was the Dewar's. Can I get a hands up from any? Can I get a thumbs up from
My
anyone?
wife chooses that one.
All right, she gets a vote. That was the most striking whiskey of the night for me. Okay. Oban 18, who says that was the best? Okay, we'll vote for Oban 18.
I picked that.
You're in, okay. Stephen is in. Let's say Glenrothes 18. Whose favorite whiskey is Glenrothes 18?
Yeah, which surprises me because it's not really my style, but
my second favorite.
Yeah, amazing. All right, and then the Weems Peat Chimney. Anybody want to pick that as their favorite? All right, we got a loser. We don't have any winners, but we got one loser. All right, so and Kilcoman Seneg, who thinks that was their favorite? And you know how we know this is a success? It's because we didn't have a clear winner. It's because we had amazing whiskey.
You forgot to mention the Highland Park.
Highland Park. Whose favorite is Highland Park?
I'm right there.
All right, Andrew's in on the Highland Park. Sorry, I missed that. I've had 6 whiskeys. I don't know how
I thought you did that on purpose.
I'm drunk. No, I'm not really drunk, but
Now,
I will be in a half an hour if anybody wants to stop by the restaurant.
Francis, the peach.
I'm walking right over.
Andrew, that's not fair. You're across the street.
It's fair. All's fair in love and whiskey.
Absolutely. You choose.
Steve, this was your fault. It was a gift. Remember?
That's it.
True that.
So, Dale, you were saying?
No, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to recommend this. I know that you need to clear your palate between whiskeys when you're doing this kind of a tasting. And since I'm living up in New England here, I found the perfect palate cleanser in between whiskeys.
A beer. Yeah.
Narragansett Lager.
Very nice. Well, even in wine cellars, they keep beer, I found out, because the acidity needs to be balanced out. And I caught the wine master in Tokaj drinking beer in the back, and I'm like, what are you doing? He says, this thing would kill me if I do it forever.
Listen, go to Tales of the Cocktail. We all drink beer at night. I mean,
that's really funny.
And you go to Tales of the Cocktail, we all have a beer at night. If you go to any of these tastings, when after Paul's tasting, and by the way, I don't think you guys get like when I said I went and I judged just the championship round this year, which is awesome. It's like, not only do I not want to work the Harvester Cup teeth, I don't even want to judge the first round. I only want the championship round. You know? There were, how many panels were in the championship round, Paul? Was it 6, 4, 5?
6. Six panels.
6 panels of 2 judges each. And look, I'm going to say this because it's important. There are a lot of spirits competitions and the county fair gold medal, and you can get a medal, you know, if it's like graduating the 3rd grade, you know, unless you really screw up, you're not going to do it. I get paid. Okay, Paul pays us all, and I think I'm the least qualified person in the room, but you know, Dale DeGroff and Masters of Wine and Master Sommeliers, and Paul pays us, and we go there for a week, and we're 5 days for just the championship round. So think about the expense that goes into making sure that, and honestly, I don't do it for the money, but I don't judge volunteer panels anymore. And the reason I don't is because you're not making the investment in the integrity of the whole thing, then I don't really want to lend you my integrity. Whereas this is like the people I'm in the room with, I am awed by, and the integrity of the process where it's double blind. Paul owns his own space with its own setup kitchen with 7 or 8 people, or with COVID times less than that, working in the back to make sure these things are blinded. This is a great honor to be invited. And every time I sit among the judges, I think, holy shit, I'm a fireman's kid from North Jersey. How did I get here, you know? And this stuff it has a lot of integrity, and there's a lot of bullshit out there. And one of the things about selling spirits for all this time is separating and hopefully you all trust me and Mark, because we spend our time like, yeah, that distillery doesn't exist. Oh, that's the first Indiana whiskey made by a company in a different state. You know, it's like there is no distillery there. So separating the wheat from the chaff and the right from the wrong and the true from the fake is hopefully why you come to us. And this was that.
You know, something I used to say in the radio show all the time, nothing should ever get a super high score or a super low score based on a single person's opinion having tasted it one time. Nothing, no restaurant should ever get 5 stars or 1 star based on a single person trying it one time. We're all affected by the other things around us, by the other aromas around us, by the other people around us, by the other flavors in our mouth, by the things we've had before it, by the day we had coming into the day. Having so many professional people taste and retaste and taste again, go through this challenge, means that each of these won because they deserve to win, not because somebody was feeling really good or really bad, or had just tasted the best thing in their life, or had just had the best, or it's a beautiful sunshiny day outside versus a doom and gloom wintry day outside. Okay, I'll tell you a fact. When Francis and I taste wines in Italy, they always taste better than they do when we're here. Okay, 100%. And always, any wine you taste at a winery or at a chateau in France or in Italy tastes better than it does when you're in the United States.
And that's when we're drinking wine. And when we are tasting in Italy, we go into our professional heads and we look at each other and we're like, okay, boom, this is analytical now. You know what I mean? It's like, and we do the analysis, and Paul does all the stuff that he does, and so that when you want really what's the best thing, the best juice in the glass, you know, we've done a lot of work to make sure that that's the best juice in the glass. And you can see that some of it's $300 a bottle, and some of it's, you know, $68 a bottle.
I mean, truthfully, I think Francis and I are pretty good at this. And for something to get on our list, we both have to really love it. Then we have other people, Julie and John, and other people who will taste through those things at the same time. But never do 8 of the greatest professionals in the world taste something in order for it to get to the top of the list. And like I said, I think Francis and I do this really, really well. But kudos to you, Paul, and kudos to the process, and kudos to guys like Dale who have who've been there for forever and ever, doing this with you and on other panels and other tastings, because it is, you're doing something special, and there's a reason that people trust you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's very nice. The check will be in the mail, guys. We should do this again.
I would love to. Let's begin
there are other great whiskey categories and cognac categories, and we could do this again. It's been great fun.
So here's the reality. We got to ask everybody on the call, if we were to do this with a different category, like American
cognac,
whiskey, would you come back and do this with us again? Yeah, good.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Great. Okay. Final.
Getting a curated selection like this? Are you kidding?
Aren't they? Yeah, isn't it fun? By the way, this was illegal 8 months ago, and
right. Realize this is something we could have only done in the restaurant, because we couldn't send portions of anything out like this. So now all of a sudden this is something we can do.
So cool. All right. Final note, by the way, if anyone wants to, Isla is our favorite region. Cowell Isla is my favorite distillery, but Bowmore is my second favorite. And if anyone wants to buy, we have one bottle left of the most expensive whiskey on our list, which we're not selling by the glass, but by the bottle. It's a Bowmore Black 1964 single barrel edition 2, which is how much?
I think it's edition 3. It's $20,000.
$20,000 a bottle. So if anyone's looking for a Christmas present, it's very, very special. It's downstairs. And what I love all you know, it's sometimes being in this business, we get to do cool stuff like judge the Ultimate Spirits Challenge. But Mark and I bought like 6 bottles of this. And yeah, we drank one of them. That's exactly right. We did. And it wasn't worth $20,000 when we drank it.
Oh, when we bought this, we bought about 24 bottles of this.
And we drank one of them.
Again, I'm not, there's a chance that many of you had this for $20 or $30 a glass 30 years ago.
And now it's how many?
Wow. It's $20,000.
$20,000 a bottle. It's we're big in Japan.
Spirits Project, that would be $800 for a 1 ounce.
Yeah. By reservation only. Okay, listen, it's almost 9 o'clock. Thank you for everybody for your patience. Thanks for trusting us and joining us for this.
I'd like to thank you all for another fireside chat with Mark and Francis.
Thank you guys. This was awesome.
So Francis, are you setting the table for the visitors coming right over?
For you.
If anyone's coming right over, we stop seating at 9. So if you want to come and have a bite, call us and we'll hold the kitchen for you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks, Francis, Dale, everyone.
Excellent project. Thank you.
Love you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Francis.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eric, good to see you again.
You too. Thank you for last night. It was epic.
Terrific.
So much fun.
I'm still
speaking of, that's the name of the great new Cabernet we are bringing in starting on Friday. It's a wine called Epic, and it is indeed epic.
And speaking of last night, we're also calling this Hair of the Dog.
It very much is.
And gentlemen, both of you, I want to thank you for the really nice event that you guys put together for my son.
We're happy to do it, Steve.
It was amazing. It felt like we're being in the middle of a small city in Europe somewhere.
That's awesome. That's what
you were in a small city in New Brunswick somewhere.
We are, yes. It was awesome. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks again. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Good night.
You can make a really good smoky Manhattan with this, I think. Right?
I agree.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Yep.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Ciao.
Mark's moving on. I'm just going to stay here and drink whiskey. There's all those bottles. Oh, I'll have a burger too. 9 o'clock. You better order right away.
Order right now.
All right, good night, folks.
Good night. Thank you.
Take care, Jim. Good to see you.
Thank you both for everything you do to bring quality spirits and food and cocktails and all of that great stuff to Central New Jersey.
I just want to say thank you because we get to live our dream and I get to have the job I want, right? And yeah, I would like one. It's because you support us and don't ever think that it's not important because it's really fucking important.
I will always be there for you guys. You do an amazing job. Thank you so much.
Thanks, brother. Have a good night.
Good night.
Take care. And there ends the first Chairman's Trophy Spirit Challenge. What a great night that was. Oh my God, these whiskeys are so great. And you know what? I've got about 2 ounces left in each bottle and I'm gonna get myself to work. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for playing. Thanks for watching.